They'll never admit it openly, because if you did, you'd stop being controlled. Since childhood, you've been taught that being good means putting yourself last, that loving others above yourself is the ultimate virtue. But this is the most convenient lie ever invented. It creates docile, harmless, and easily manipulated people. Machiavelli already knew, politics guided by reality shows that it's not those who collect hugs who gain ground, but those who understand that respecting oneself is more feared than loving others. And here's the shock. When you discover that the end justifies the means, you realize that loving yourself first isn't selfishness, it's survival. Because the world doesn't respect those who fade away. It respects those who stand up. Loving yourself above all else is the gesture that bothers you most. And precisely for that reason, it's the one that liberates you most. Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear isn't sweet advice. It's a harsh sentence, a sentence that could turn you inside out. The question is, are you ready to carry this cruel secret? The hidden poison of love for one's neighbor. From childhood, we were taught that loving others above self was the greatest virtue. But what no one tells us is that this blind devotion can turn into a slow poison, corroding the very identity of those who practice it. When someone constantly puts themselves second, believing that self-sacrifice is the path to nobility, they lose their voice and end up living under the expectations of others. It's like giving the key to your house to anyone who knocks on the door, not realizing that sooner or later someone will enter not to thank you, but to dominate. Machiavelli already warned that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, reveals a bitter trait of human nature. Excessive kindness is interpreted as weakness. And in that moment, the generous heart becomes the easiest target in the silent game of power. The curious thing is that those who overly indulge in loving others often believe they are earning respect, when in reality they are harboring the illusion that they will be protected by others' gratitude. But the reality is different. The return rarely comes in kind. Consider the case of religious or community leaders who, in the name of altruism, emptied themselves until they had nothing left, leaving only weariness and the contempt of those who exploited their goodwill. This is where Machiavellian wisdom emerges. The end justifies the means doesn't mean acting without limits, but understanding that protecting yourself, even if it seems selfish, is often the only way to avoid being swallowed up by the hunger of others. Love for others can be beautiful, but if not balanced by self-love, it becomes a death trap. A practical example of this is in workplace relationships. How many times has someone agreed to work unpaid overtime, believing they were helping the team, only to realize later that they become a slave to the appearance of virtue? The person who never says no ends up being overworked, while those who know how to set boundaries earn respect. And here, one of Machiavelli's greatest lessons applies. It's better to be feared than loved, as long as one knows how to avoid being hated. The calculated use of force, in this case, is not physical but psychological. The strength to set clear boundaries, to place one's own worth above the desire to please. This is the antidote to the hidden poison of love for one's neighbor. But if that already sounds uncomfortable, wait until you see what happens when kindness, that supposed virtue, reveals itself to be the greatest of weaknesses. Why kindness is your greatest weakness. Kindness, when used without conscience, is like leaving the doors of a castle open in the middle of a war. Those who believe that being kind is enough to conquer the world forget that human nature is not driven by ideals, but by self-interest. Machiavelli once said, decisions should be made based on the reality of human nature, not romantic fantasies. When someone insists on always being pleasant, on never contradicting, they fall into the trap of becoming predictable. And predictable, in the game of power, means vulnerable. It's like the chess player who never dares a risky move, Sooner or later, they will be crushed by those who know constant adaptability as a weapon. Unfiltered kindness doesn't protect, it exposes. A simple example: think of that person in the office who never turns down a request. At first, everyone praises them, calling them an angel. But before long, they become the dumping ground for unwanted tasks, an easy target for the overbearing boss or the manipulative colleague. What began as a virtue becomes a sentence of weakness. The truth is harsh. Being too nice is the fastest way to lose ground and respect. The calculated use of force here doesn't mean brutality, but the courage to say no, to set limits, and to make it clear that one's energy is not available to be drained without return. Those who don't learn this early on end up discovering too late that limitless kindness is fertile ground for exploitation. Now imagine the irony. The same kindness that should bring us closer often drives us apart. Because when someone never takes a stand, they send the silent message that they lack virtù, that inner strength that combines courage, strategy, and the capacity for action. And without virtù, fortune, that fickle dance of fate, never favors. This is why so many relationships fall apart, not from a lack of love, but from the absence of respect, which stems from the inability to establish boundaries. Kindness without the counterbalance of firmness becomes a mortal weakness. And if you think that's hard, wait until you understand the secret game between love and power, where feelings cease to be poetry and reveal themselves as a survival strategy. The secret game between love and power. Those who observe life solely through the prism of love forget that, on the real chessboard, love and power don't go hand in hand. They duel in silence. The secret game lies in the fact that the more someone strives to be loved, the less power they wield. Machiavelli already revealed this dilemma. It's better to be feared than loved, as long as one knows how to avoid being hated. Love may be sweet, but it's unstable. Fickle like fortune, who smiles today and spits in your face tomorrow. Power, on the other hand, is born of virtù, of firm decisions based on real human nature, not idealized fantasies. And this is where the uncomfortable question arises. What's the point of collecting hugs if deep down no one takes your words seriously? A practical example is in relationships. How often does someone confuse total surrender with true love, believing that always giving in is proof of affection? But in reality, the partner begins to lose interest. Excessive love destroys the balance, as it creates the feeling that the other person has no self-worth. It's like a merchant who gives away a product for free. No matter how pleasing it may be at first, it will soon be seen as disposable. The secret game between love and power is cruel, but true. Those who don't set limits end up serving, not being served. And the curious thing is that when someone learns to respect themselves, the love of others grows, precisely because there is power in their stance. Consider the great leaders of history. Many were loved, but only those who knew how to balance that love with the shadow of fear remained relevant. It's not about being a tyrant, but about using strategic calculation, giving enough affection to maintain closeness, but never relinquishing your position of strength. This is the trick most fear to admit. Love is fickle, but respect rooted in power is enduring. And when someone begins to see this, they realize the great lie they've always been told, that being harmless is the path to virtue. But what happens when this lie is revealed? That's what we'll discover in the next step of this journey. The lie that taught you to be harmless. From an early age, society told us a dangerous fable, that being harmless was synonymous with being good. They taught us that blind obedience, the appearance of virtue and docility were signs of high character. But behind this narrative lurked a strategy of control. A docile people are easier to govern, a harmless employee is easier to exploit, a passive partner is easier to manipulate. Machiavelli already knew this. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, reveals that voluntary fragility was never a virtue. It was submission in disguise. And deep down, this goodness they preach is just an elegant way of turning people into disposable items. Look at the corporate world. The employee who silently accepts everything is called a model employee. But over time, it's precisely this employee who suffers the most layoffs because they haven't built respect, only sympathy. Meanwhile, the one who knows how to set boundaries, who uses the cold calculation of when to say yes and when to say no, is seen as a leader. This is what Machiavelli would call the calculated use of force. Not a direct attack, but the ability to position oneself without apologizing for existing. The lie of harmlessness creates a mass of people trained to be lovable, but forgotten, discarded, and replaced as soon as they cease to be useful. And the cruelest thing about this lie is that it infiltrates the most intimate relationships. How many times have we heard, "Don't do that, it's ugly. Be nice, no one likes angry people. Be kind and everyone will like you." We grow up believing that love depends on erasing our strength. But the effect is the opposite. Those who become harmless lose value because they don't command respect. It's like a dog that never bites. Everyone pets it, but no one fears it. And without fear, there is no power. This is the most insidious trap we've ever been taught. And when someone wakes up from this lie, they discover the brutal price of always putting themselves second. The brutal price of putting yourself second. Life exacts a heavy toll on those who insist on putting themselves second. Every time someone gives up space, gives up a dream, or suppresses their own voice to please others, the world silently records, "He's not a priority, he can wait." Machiavelli warned that those who don't understand the weight of true human nature become easy prey. Blind altruism sounds beautiful in theory, but in practice it becomes an invisible prison. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means used by many is to exploit the goodwill of those who never dare to claim their place. The price is paid in the form of wear and tear, resentment, and, worse still, loss of identity. Look at it in everyday life. That mother who sacrifices herself for everyone but never takes care of herself. The employee who works twice as hard and never gets promoted. The friend who always listens but is never heard. They all pay the price for self-abandonment. And the curious thing is that the more they put themselves in the background, the less they are valued. It's the cruel paradox. Those who erase themselves for the sake of others don't earn admiration, they earn oblivion. The calculated use of force would be precisely the opposite, knowing when to say enough is enough, when to demand recognition, and when to prioritize one's own needs. Without this, the cycle of exploitation never ends. The brutal price of living this way goes beyond the practical sphere. It destroys the spirit. Those who live in self-effacement lose virtù, the vital energy that drives great transformations. And without virtù, fortune, already unstable, becomes a sworn enemy. How many people reach old age bitter, realizing they spent decades building castles for others to inhabit, while their own inner home fell into ruins? This is the fate of those who always put themselves second. And precisely at this point, the turning point arises. When one views Machiavelli not as a tyrant, but as a liberator, one realizes that he destroys the myth of altruism and exposes the farce that keeps us harmless. How Machiavelli destroys the myth of altruism. What Machiavelli did, and what still troubles so much today, was to shatter the fantasy of altruism as the supreme ideal. He wasn't writing for the naive, but for those who wanted to survive amid the political savagery of his time. Altruism, sold as an absolute virtue, was for him merely a disguise, a mechanism used by the powerful to keep others docile. Politics, guided by reality, not ideals, shows that when someone gives too much of themselves, they lose their ability to influence and become hostage to circumstances. And Machiavelli knew those who lack self-control end up dominated by others. Thus, altruism ceases to be nobility and reveals itself as the perfect trap for those who don't see the game. Consider how this myth spreads today. Companies sell the image that we are a family to extract unlimited dedication from employees. Religions promise heaven to those who sacrifice themselves to the extreme. Governments extol charity to hide the lack of justice. And meanwhile, those who blindly believe in altruism end up serving as a stepping stone for those who use force calculatedly, those who understand that the end justifies the means when survival is at stake. The Machiavellian lesson is stark. It's not about despising others, but about understanding that giving without criteria is not generosity, it's naivete. Machiavelli destroys the myth by exposing its contradiction. The absolute altruist expects recognition, but rarely receives it. At most, they are exploited. Meanwhile, those who balance self-love with strategy gain respect and space. What he proposes is a practical virtue, the ability to act firmly, to impose limits, to use constant adaptability, to avoid being swallowed up by the power game. It's a radical inversion. It's not the altruist who leads, but the one who knows how to transform their strength into a reference. But this dark side of compassion, the side no one reveals, is the most frightening, and that's where we're headed now. The dark side of compassion that no one reveals. Compassion is one of the most exalted virtues, but rarely does anyone dare to speak of its dark side. When used distortedly, it becomes a tool of manipulation. How often is compassion demanded not as a genuine gesture, but as emotional blackmail? Society has learned to applaud those who sacrifice themselves for others, but Machiavelli, with his reality-driven vision of politics, already understood that this sacrifice is not always a choice. It is often imposed. Unlimited compassion can imprison both the giver and the receiver, creating relationships of dependence in which the strong become weak and the weak become accustomed to draining the other's energy. A clear example is family relationships. How many adult children remain stagnant because their parents, in the name of compassion, don't let them face the consequences of their choices? Kindness becomes a crutch, and the crutch, a prison. The same occurs in friendships and love. I'll do anything for you turns, over time, into silent pressure. This is the dark side of compassion. Instead of liberating, it imprisons. Does the end justify the means? For those who want to keep someone under control, yes, but in practice, this excessive care erodes the inner strength of both parties. Virtue disappears, and what's left is a vicious cycle of dependence and resentment. The silence surrounding this topic is no coincidence. Admitting that compassion can have a cruel side threatens the veneer of virtue so many cultivate. It's uncomfortable to accept that helping too much can be as destructive as not helping at all. But that's precisely the point. The calculated use of force also means knowing when not to intervene, even if it hurts. Machiavelli dismantles the illusion that all compassion is positive and shows that, without strategy, even the purest kindness can be weaponized against those who practice it. And it is precisely here that an uncomfortable revelation arises. Respecting oneself is, in many cases, more feared and more effective than loving others. Why respecting yourself is more feared than loving others? Self-respect carries a weight that loving others never achieves. Loving others may even generate sympathy, but respecting oneself imposes limits that arouse fear. And herein lies the Machiavellian paradox. Love is unstable, changing with the winds of fortune. Respect, when consolidated by virtue, remains solid and inevitable. This is why leaders who put themselves first are seen as steadfast, even if they aren't the most charismatic. Meanwhile, those who seek to be loved above all else end up fragile, constantly hostage to external approval. Machiavelli knew It is better to be feared than loved, because fear is born of respect, and respect does not waver with the emotions of the day. In practice, think about the workplace. A manager who tries to please every employee ends up without authority, drowning in favors and promises they can't keep. The manager who establishes clear rules, demands performance, and respects their own limits may not be the most loved, but they are the most respected. And guess who delivers results? This is the calculated use of force. It's not about brutality, but about clarity and firmness. Self-respect in this context is more than self-esteem. It's a survival strategy. It's the invisible shield that prevents abuse and protects against manipulation, disguised as affection. The same applies to personal relationships. When someone makes their own worth clear, others think twice before overstepping their boundaries. This doesn't alienate. It brings people closer with quality. Love without respect is fragile, but respect, even without love, sustains bonds. And this is where society becomes alarmed, because when a person learns to respect themselves, they become immune to the narratives that taught them to be harmless. This is the point at which compassion loses its power to imprison, and a kind of silent mastery is born, self-mastery. And this mastery opens the door to the most powerful psychological trick of all, transforming self-love into mastery over the world. The psychological trick that turns self-love into mastery. Few people realize it, but there's a psychological trick that separates the fragile from those in command, transforming self-love into dominance. Self-love, when it's nothing more than self-help phrases, changes nothing. But when it's transformed into practice, into firm decisions, into a stance toward the world, it becomes a form of power. Machiavelli already understood that decisions based on real human nature are more powerful than empty ideals. And the reality is clear. Those who value themselves project authority. When someone conveys the silent message that you respect them, others tend to respect them too. It's almost an invisible spell, but it works because it touches the root of human instinct. No one dares to despise someone who doesn't despise themselves. A simple example: a person enters a negotiation room. If they arrive apologizing for existing, giving in before even hearing the proposal, they will be devoured. But if they enter with a firm posture, a confident gaze, and clarity about what they deserve, the perception changes. The curious thing is that, even without raising their voice, this individual commands respect. This is self-love in action. It's the calculated use of force. It's not about shouting, but about occupying the space without hesitation. It is at this point that self-love ceases to be just a feeling and becomes a strategy, almost like an invisible shield. Does the end justify the means? In this case, yes. The means is self-control. The end is control over the situation. This psychological trick, when applied well, creates a kind of aura. It's not arrogance, it's not pride. It's the silent certainty of those who know their own worth. Historical leaders, artists, entrepreneurs, everyone who made history carried this presence. It was the reflection of a cultivated virtue, of an inner strength that didn't depend on external validation. This is the point at which self-love ceases to be a luxury and becomes a weapon. And yet, society prefers to hide this truth, because an entire population learning to love themselves first would be impossible to control. Therefore, the great revelation is stifled. The truth no one wants you to discover is precisely this: that loving yourself first is the cruelest and most liberating secret. The truth society hides about loving yourself first. Society will never openly admit it, but the biggest secret is this: whoever you love first is impossible to manipulate. From an early age, we've been trained to believe that prioritizing others is a virtue, that putting yourself first is selfish. This is the farce that keeps masses obedient, docile, afraid to assume their own power. But Machiavelli had already unmasked this logic centuries ago. Politics guided by reality shows that no one survives if they don't take care of themselves first. The end justifies the means, and the means, in this case, is radical self-worth. The hidden truth is that loving yourself is the first act of rebellion against a system that profits from your submission. Look around. Companies, governments, religions, even families, they all preach unconditional altruism because they know it produces harmless individuals. An employee who puts the company above themselves is easier to exploit. A citizen who sacrifices themselves for the collective without question is easier to govern. A partner who believes that loving means forgetting themselves is easier to control. This is why loving yourself first sounds so dangerous. It subverts the established order. The calculated use of force here is not against the other, but against the lie we've been taught since childhood. Loving yourself first is breaking the invisible programming that trains us to live in second place. The most disturbing thing is realizing that this truth has always been before us, but it was disguised under the guise of virtue. Why is self-respect seen as arrogance? Because deep down, those who respect themselves don't need to ask permission to exist. This is the kind of person who bothers, who doesn't bend, who can't be tamed. And that's precisely what makes this secret so cruel. It shows us that true freedom has never been about being loved, but about loving yourself above all else. It's a revelation that opens an uncomfortable portal, because once you see this, you can no longer fool yourself with the pretense of altruism. And the next step is inevitable. Using this truth as a weapon to rewrite your own life. Now that you've heard all this, the question remains: how long will you continue putting yourself second? How long will you believe the farce that being harmless is a virtue? Machiavelli once said that decisions must be guided by reality, and the reality is clear. Those who don't love themselves first become tools in the hands of others. And I challenge you, what would change in your life if starting today you put respect before love? What would your relationships, your work, your choices be like? Would you have the courage to use this cruel secret as a weapon to never be manipulated again? If something inside you has begun to tear, don't ignore it. Apply it now. Rethink your stance, set boundaries, and embrace your worth. This is the first step toward a life that doesn't depend on other people's approval. And if you want to continue delving into these surgical cuts that society tries to hide, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay tuned, because here you'll never hear the same old lies again.